In 1787, during the ratification and Constitutional Convention, there was a collection of articles and essays written and letters written to promote ratification of the Constitution. And they were known as the Federalist Papers. And they were published in newspapers and journals. Citizens were given an outlook and an opinion of the new document, this new document that was going to run the country. There were different representatives from each state that wrote in these articles, but what it provided was viewpoints. Why the new document was better than the Articles of Confederation, than the old way. Why was it better than the old way? These articles didn't spew out a bunch of vague, this will save the children, and if you want to save the children, you'll just support it without putting any thought into it. They didn't just talk about it being great. They didn't just talk about it being awesome, and then they talked about how it's going to be better. They talked about why. They talked about the pros and cons. They even provided the opposite argument, and then they would bring up their argument on why even that one was wrong. And it's super interesting to read them. Some of them are long, some of them are short, but I encourage people to read them. It's really interesting to see these conversations, the back and forth dialogue of why it was better. For citizens, the information was presented in the press. This is an example of freedom of the press. They presented the argument in the newspaper, and at that time, their form of media. It's also super interesting to know that there was another collection of articles called the Anti-Federalist Papers. So what did these do? These presented why they were against it, why there were some people against it. And they did the same thing. They brought the opposing view, they brought why, and they brought how. They wanted to adjust it or make it better. Both sides bringing both viewpoints to the public in public opinion and public format, at that time their form of media. This format is how regular citizens got information. There's a letter called The Landholder by Oliver Ellsworth. This is a part of one of the Federalist Papers, and it was presented in the Connecticut newspaper, the Hartford. And he says, in this letter, he says, "Citizens, take up this Constitution with the same spirit of candor and liberality. Consider it in all its parts. If any objections are made against it, let us obtain full information on the subject, and then weigh these objections in the balance of cool, impartial reason. Study both sides of it, then make a decision." This shows the importance and responsibility of the press at that time. Presenting and printing both sides of the argument, even if you agreed with it or not. The press presented both sides, and the citizens were creating and reading these arguments. So it was a responsibility on both ends. It was responsibility of the press to print it, and it was a responsibility of the citizens to create it and to read it. What this is, there's nothing new about creating content. That's what this proves. This is old school content creation. It's easier than ever. It's easier, way easier than ever, to create content or get your information out there. And I'm no different. People can admit it or not. People can get a lot of information on social media, and you can get a lot of bad stuff on social media. Over the last couple of years, I think it's safe to say people have reached out to alternative forms of where they get their press, where they get their media. There's a lot of smart people out there, and with awesome ideas and perspectives. And I think there's some people that are really smart, that have awesome perspectives, that would be a great influence, that are, they may They may feel that they're just succumbing to the social media craze, and they don't want to stoop to what they might consider a low level. Video podcasts they're awesome way to get content out there, and I think it's safe to say that one of the more famous ones, Joe Rogan's podcast, would be the most cliche, but Joe Rogan's podcast, he invites everybody. He gets viewpoints from every side. Not everybody agrees with everybody, and both sides listen. They present their ideas, and there's actual thinking involved. So regardless where you're at politically, regardless where you're at religiously, you can't say that both sides aren't at least argued. And you can't say that about today's media. You can't say that about today's press. You are either listening to one side or the other. One thing that they had to do was admit if something was a good idea. When you present both sides of the argument, they had to decide which ideas were realistic. And I'm going back to the founding fathers. I'm going back to the Constitutional Convention here. But in the end, overall, what does all of this mean? And what it means is that it is a citizen's responsibility to create some form of content. Whether you put yourself out there at a school board meeting, whether you put yourself out there on social media with maybe a podcast, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people do not want to get involved with the media drama, just this back and forth, no dialogue, just accusations. There's a way to do it. There's a way to create your content, your old school content. Do your duty as a citizen and have some ideas and put them out there. There are people that blog. There are people out there with posts that they make that they post them and then they kind of disappear. I feel that the content that was created at this time was more dialogue based. It was more, we're going to respond to what you said and we're going to have reasons for it based. What about being canceled? There's multiple platforms out there. If it's just about money or just about that, it's probably not going to go over that well. But if it's about getting your content out there and you have good ideas, like I said, there's some awesome people out there. Get your ideas out there. If you promote an idea or create content, just be ready to justify it. Be ready to have a point behind it. Be ready to defend it and discuss, and not be offended that somebody dislikes your content or dislikes what you have to say. And there are people out there that just don't want to be disagreed with. And they might have some awesome ideas, but they don't want to be disagreed with. Be ready to have an answer. Be prepared to have an answer and back up what it is that you're saying. There's nothing new about people presenting their ideas in social platforms. There's nothing new about this. The only thing new is the way that it's being done and the platforms. And I think a lot of people don't do this because they feel that they're lowering themselves to some sort of social media culture. And I'd admit that's how I felt before presenting these ideas. And at the same time, if it gets people to think, just getting people to think is the point. Just to make a few changes maybe in their lives as individuals. These are things that you can do today. You can provide some sort of viewpoint or outlook, and I think that it's important to know that you can make these changes today. But the main point is, how can you use it to contribute? How can you use today's tools to contribute? It's not going away. And one important example would be the Kyle Rittenhouse case. There were multiple cell phones that were being used to record that. And regardless of where you're at with the Kyle Rittenhouse case, regardless of where you're at with that incident, there were multiple angles of that video taken and people did it with their cell phones. So there were different viewpoints presented because of that. Literally different viewpoints presented because of that. And another point to consider, content works. If you have a good point and it's true and it's truth and it's sincere, you're going to reach someone. And I feel people like Jordan Peterson, whose content accidentally got out there just because he had a viewpoint, is sincere in what he says about people, in what he wants people to know. He is, and men especially feel that, and women as well. But the reason he's reached most men is because they feel he is sincere in what he's saying. You can change. You can make change. You can present these ideas, your viewpoints, or your content, and even if it reaches one person, it was probably worth it. If you have a viewpoint and you don't know why you believe it, it's your responsibility to figure out why. Or it's your responsibility to figure out maybe you didn't believe that in the first place. But modern content, there's a lot out there. And you have to find out who's sincere and who's not. And most of this has been able to be seen because of the one-on-one dialogue, because of the one-on-one questions to each other. And there's a lot of smart people out there and good people that probably don't know that they're reaching people. There are others who didn't mean to be famous, but they stood up for something, they believed it, but they know why they believe it. Whether you're conservative or liberal, whether you're atheist or Christian, and if you don't know why you believe what you believe, you're not going to change anything. You're not going to reach anyone. Be a good citizen and provide some content to the citizens. Freedom of the press is a thing because people had the right to address current issues. They had the right to present viewpoints and even opinions, but with a base of truth and why they believed what they believed and how it was going to make changes. And it's easier than ever to address current issues. It's easier than ever to get your content out there. Providing a view with reason and discernment means that you are thinking. And providing opposing views with reason and discernment promotes others to think. For the Vital Expedition, I'm Nathan Lewis, Studio Veritatis.